This is Think Energy, the podcast that helps you better understand the fast-changing world of energy through conversations with game changers, industry leaders, and influencers. So join me, Dan Sege, as I explore both traditional and unconventional facets of the energy industry. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're moving into the fast lane and talking about converting vehicles that are used for commercial purposes, such as delivery trucks, buses, and taxis, away from traditional fossil fuel powered engines to electric power. That's right, we're learning about fleet electrification. So start your electric engines, they're so quiet, and fasten your seatbelt because we have a great guest to explore more about this topic. So why are cities greening their fleet? Not only does this shift help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it also packs a punch in the fight against climate change. The transportation sector is one of the largest contributors of GHG emissions, accounting for more than 20% of global emissions. The shift towards EVs, electric vehicles, in commercial fleets can significantly reduce these emissions. In fact, the City of Ottawa plans to have an entirely zero-emission bus fleet by 2036. While fleet electrification is still in its early stages, it has the potential to play a crucial role in helping Canada reach its 2050 net zero targets, especially as demand speeds up. So here's today's big question. In addition to producing fewer life cycle emissions than traditional vehicles, what are the economic benefits of fleet owners and operators? So buckle up, friends. Today we have Jim Pegg, Director of the Infrastructure, Product, and Services at Envari Energy Solutions, here to talk to us about the new Star Fleet. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you on our show again. Now, we've been hearing a lot about electrification of vehicles. It's no secret that the government has set some ambitious goals, like the mandate for all new passenger vehicles and light-duty trucks to be zero emissions by 2035. But here's what I'm curious about. Jim, what's the scoop when it comes to fleet? I'm talking about city buses, school buses, delivery vehicles, and the like. Are organizations who manage fleets making that transition as well? And most importantly, why is this shift in the fleet industry so crucial?
Well, that's a great question. So I'd say more and more municipalities and large fleet operators are making the transition to electric vehicles, or at least starting to seriously plan out the change. Municipalities are definitely early adopters transitioning to electric vehicles, starting with their light-duty fleets. And of course, the big one, buses. Buses are a big contributor to GHG emissions, so it has a big impact on their pathway to net zero plans. Converting them to zero emission vehicles, it's just a big part of that whole journey. School buses are an important fleet to talk about as well. We can all agree less diesel fumes for our kids, less fumes they breathe in each day, the better. There's actually a few studies out there that talk about the health benefits for kids switching to electric buses. So, light duty fleets such as delivery fleets are also starting to make the switch. There's definitely more vehicle options available for light duty fleets right now, making it a great place to start and get comfortable with electric vehicles and importantly, the charging infrastructure that goes with them. I'd say, the big driver there right now is GHG reduction. So as a result, government grants are out there to accelerate the transition. So it's a good time for any fleet operator to start looking at the change and planning out when it will make the most sense for them. Not only from like an environmental point of view, but also from a cost perspective. The grants aren't going to be around forever. And I think that's a big part of the business cases right now. There are savings as well going to electric vehicles. We all see the price at the pumps going up, and there's also operational savings that can be seen with electric vehicles. Bottom line, I'd say fleets produce a huge amount of GHG emissions. Converting them to zero emission vehicles will have a tremendously positive impact with a lower total cost of ownership. So, it's a win-win at the end of the day. The trick is making sure that EVs will meet your fleet's needs. And that's a big part of the the questions out there right now.
Now, with all of the benefits described, it sounds like a no-brainer to make the transition to an electric fleet. So what's the catch? What are some of the actual challenges that municipalities and businesses are grappling with when it comes to electrifying their fleet vehicles?
Well, with any big change, there's always challenges. In this case, there are a few, but with good planning, they are manageable. I'd say, the basic conversations we have, typically there's 7 or so key things that you need to consider. If I were to go through those, I'll try to be brief, but let's start with cost. So electric vehicles, in most cases, do cost more initially. That is why understanding the total cost of ownership is important. Comparing things like maintenance costs over the life of the vehicle, energy cost, gas or diesel versus electricity, understanding your current costs versus what they will look like is important to help justify that increased initial investment. Next up, I'd say vehicle availability. Is there an EV that is comparable to the vehicles that the fleets are using now that will provide the same or better operational functionality? At the end of the day, fleet operators need a solution that allows them to continue successful operation of their fleet, which takes us to the next point, EV charging. With EVs, you need to think about how your charging infrastructure is going to work, where it can go physically. Do you have the capacity? What charging strategy will you use? Understanding when you can charge without disrupting your operational needs. The cost of EV infrastructure is an important consideration. Many fleet operators will need to increase their electricity capacity from their utility, but this needs to be carefully planned. Capacity upgrades involve assets that last 40, 50, and sometimes 60 years. The last thing you want to do is make an investment only to find out you didn't install enough capacity for future projects like building GHG reduction projects, or that you oversized your new service and wasted money at the start. The good news is there are well thought out ways to approach these problems, proven steps to take, that with things to consider and strategies to allow for a phased approach to converting to EVs. The truth is I could go on for a while on this specific topic, but let's just say, I'd highly recommend any fleet operator out there to talk to someone that does this every day, that has an eye for the full picture, not just the EV power needs, but experience will be helpful on this topic. You will learn about things like preconditioning your vehicles in winter and to increase, your range in winter, for example. So from there, I'd say let's talk about range. Let's go into range anxiety. That's another piece that people think about. And this is a big one. The last thing fleet operators want is to have vehicles stranded with no power. This is another good reason that planning stage is so important. Looking at your fleet's usage, dwell times, best case and worst case scenarios like winter operation when range is reduced. Modeling your fleet's usage is an important part of the planning process. Bus fleets are a great example of routes or overall distance traveled in a day that can be somewhat managed and evaluated. At the same time, working to consider changes in fleet needs is also important. Fleets and their usage patterns change every year, and they will, for many years to come. Some very good news is there are more and more chargers being installed around the country. This won't replace the need for fleets to have their own chargers, but it will help with some of the fleets that have more unpredictable usage pattern. At the end of the day, let's face it, you have to get to where the work is. So there's lots of things to think about there. Next up, I'd say there's energy cost and reliability. So switching from gas or diesel to electricity means you'll become dependent on your local utility providing electricity in a reliable way. That's why it's so important to connect with your local utility or have a partner that can do that on your behalf. Other strategies such as, on-site battery storage, which is great to support cost management, but it may not be the solution for, critical fleet reliability because, batteries have very short duration output to them. So on-site power generation may come into play. Again, many things to consider that all work together, and understanding your new electricity bills, what it's going to look like and ways to reduce those costs will become an ongoing operational need. Having a good energy advisor will support this need and could save fleet operators a significant amount of money. And let's not forget the various grants and funding streams available. Two more that I'd want to touch on would be Maintenance and tooling. EVs require less overall maintenance, but some different expertise might be required. So training staff in a timely manner on how to maintain your fleet. If you do the maintenance in-house, it's an important transition piece, right? Most importantly, how maintenance can be done safely. Electricity can be seen, but proper steps need to be taken to ensure safety. With any new technology or anything related to electricity, safety has always got to be top of mind. And that's a big piece that operators need to make sure they're thinking about, depending on the size of their fleet and what's going to have to go in the planning around safety to make sure people go home safely at the end of the day. The last thing I'd talk about I'd say is driver training. Driving an EV and knowing how to manage your power usage can have a big impact on the success of your fleet. So knowing how to take advantage of regenerative braking, understanding the impact, say, of features such as heating, cooling of your battery life itself, hard accelerations versus smooth accelerations. I'd say, simply put, some of the simple lessons and training can have a really big impact on your fleet's success. There's a lot of thought that goes into planning a fleet's conversion to electric, but I'd say that is why experts, and maybe a little self-plug here, such as Envari, can be relied upon, right, to take on that transition and make that transition as smooth as possible. No two fleets are the same, but combining a fleet operator's knowledge of what they do with an organization that knows and understands electricity is a great way to start the change.
Jim, given these considerations, are there certain types of vehicles that are more suitable for electrification than others? And if so, why?
Well, I would say there are fleets that have vehicles ready now for electrification. And I'd say there are fleets that are still a bit off in the future. At the same time, converting a full fleet day one isn't always a great idea. Dipping a toe in the water sometimes works best. In parallel to that, planning and working with a partner who understands the options out there, listens to the fleet operator's needs, and I can't stress that enough. You have to really take the time to understand the need of the fleet and all their unique characteristics, and understand how they use their fleets. It's a very important piece. It needs to be a very collaborative approach. But fleet operators are experts in how they run their fleet, and having someone that knows the electrical side of things is going to help them through those planning studies and implementations. You can make a really great recipe. Apart from that, battery improvements are being developed. New EV vehicles are on the way, and it won't be long before there are options out there for every fleet, big and small. But I'd say the vehicle selection and that analysis is certainly a step that needs to be taken.
What is the current state of charging infrastructure for fleet vehicles? Is the technology there?
So I'd say charging technology has come a long way. I can remember far back as maybe 12 years ago installing some EV chargers, and they've certainly come a long way since then. The good news too is that they're constantly improving. I would say that the charging technology available today is in a good place to support fleet electrification. Options like parallel charging, AC charging, DC charging, sequential charging. Actually, for large overhead pantograph charging, which is often used on bus fleets, there's a new standard that was just released that includes sequential charging for pantograph style chargers. And that's a big step in the right direction, and even talking about RFID tags. So the standards and so on are constantly evolving, and there are lots of different industry partners in that ecosystem trying to make sure things get standardized, because that benefits everyone at the end of the day. Bottom line, there are lots of charging options out there. The trick really is understanding which one will work best for your needs, and how to ensure it's flexible so that you can incorporate different chargers down the road. Being a technology agnostic organization such as ourselves has really helped us find the best solution for specific applications. And to be clear, often there is a need for a mix of charger sizes and a strategy behind DC versus AC charging. Often with fleets, you want to rely a lot more on DC charging rather than relying on the rectification on the vehicle. DC does not have to mean big fast chargers. People often think of level 3, 100 kilowatt, 50 kilowatt chargers with DC chargers. You can get, 24 kilowatt DC chargers there that are reliable and made by very reputable OEMs. So,
being an EV owner myself, I can confirm that our cold Canadian winters pose certain challenges when it comes to battery life. Is this something to be aware of? And how can organizations mitigate any issues?
So I would say yes, it is true that the cold weather has an impact on batteries. Depending on where you are on the globe, there's different weather patterns and so on. But cold weather certainly has an impact on batteries and the range you can get out of those batteries. Currently, there are a few ways to tackle this. One is something called preconditioning, meaning having your vehicle plugged in while it's warming up in the morning, and you can actually automate that to take place at a certain time, and it can help maintain the battery's range for that day. So that can have a really big impact. The other factor, is what we talked about a little bit earlier, was driver training. Simple things like understanding the impact of a few degrees of heat can have, or how people actually drive smooth versus hard accelerations. All of those things have an impact on the range you get out of your battery. The good news is with upfront planning, these issues can be managed to a point where they're not issues at all. And if more public chargers come online each year, the certainty around getting from point A to B to C to D to E to F and G, gets stronger and stronger. There's also a lot of work going into battery technology itself that will help with cold climates, as well as the speed at which batteries can be recharged without causing, increased battery degradation. The risk right now is if, fleets or vehicles are out there and they're constantly having to use fast chargers and higher power chargers on their vehicles, on the smaller, size fleets, that can have a damaging impact on your battery life. But there's a lot of technology going into working on that. But again, with good planning and understanding of a fleet's needs, there's certainly ways to plan around those issues.
We're all aware that electricity rates can vary based on the number of different factors such as time of day, the season, the customer class, etc. How can fleet operators effectively manage these fluctuations to optimize charging and minimize costs?
So, electricity rates is going to be a changing landscape over the coming years as I would say governments and regulators look for ways to encourage electrification while at the same time managing infrastructure costs related to, distributing power. So, that said, we're also in a time of machine learning and AI, meaning software is going to play a big part in optimizing charging schedules. There are some great organizations out there that specialize in this exact type of software. Pair that with the knowledge of the electricity rate structure in your area, and you can find some very effective ways to manage your electricity costs. The risk is also there. If you do not plan for electricity costs or manage them on an ongoing basis, your costs could quickly increase versus an optimized scenario. For example, in Ontario, there's something called global adjustment. And, knowing how to manage your global adjustment costs will have a big impact on your electricity bill. Now, there's a balance. First and most importantly, a fleet needs to operate as a fleet. So, a good partner will work with you to optimize your costs based on your fleet needs, and then work to educate and support fleet operators on what changes they could make to their fleet operations that would result in some cost savings or significant cost savings. But with the changing landscape, it's something that has to be an ongoing effort for sure.
Okay, Jim, how do government policies and regulations impact the electrification of fleets?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd say there's a few ways. One of the big ones is government, noting that all vehicles sold as of a certain date and time will need to be, zero emission vehicles. Means fleets will have to look at vehicles other than the gas and diesel options, that they use now as their fleets come to end of life. So as they're looking to replace their fleets, they're going to have to think about what vehicles are actually going to be sold and available as they get to those different points in time. The cost of electricity and distribution rates and rate design will have an impact on the total cost of ownership, as we just talked about, for EV fleets. And in other areas such as manufacturing, different import and export policies, trade agreements with other countries, mining policies, all those different things can impact the production of EV vehicles and, right to its core, the availability of vehicles, which is obviously a big need.
Okay, sir. How about funding? Are there any incentive programs out there, and how can they help those who might be considering electrification?
There is funding out there right now for things such as charging infrastructure, and in some cases to support the cost delta between traditional vehicles and EVs. A couple examples, I would say, we have the Zero Emission Transit Fund, which supports municipal bus fleet electrification, as well as school bus electrification. There's actually, there's two parts to that one in particular. There's, you can get, I believe it's up to 80% of the planning costs covered. And for your actual capital investments, I believe it's up to 50% with some fairly high caps there. So there's quite a bit of funding available there. Another example would be the Canadian Infrastructure Bank is offering low interest loans to help with that initial upfront investment that's required. And, we're seeing other various grant programs, under NRCan, their ZVIP program has had various phases to it as well to help support electric charging. So I mean, there's different programs coming out, and that is also a bit of an ongoing thing that we have to watch constantly and be ready for. And that can be a bit of a process to go through some of the applications, but once you understand the process, it becomes much simpler. And I mean, having someone to work with to do that with you, you can have a lot of success there. Each program has its own rules and requirements to apply, but I can say from firsthand experience, the funding is there. It is accessible. We've had great success getting many of our customers some really great funding.
Okay, now, time to take out your crystal ball, Jim. What's the future of fleet electrification, and how do you see it evolving in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, this is one that the engineering team and everyone loves to chat about while having their morning coffee. I think we'll see more and more advancement in the battery technology, and I touched on that a bit earlier. In the charging technology, along with that, and more creative ways to leverage the stored energy of multiple vehicles connected at multiple locations. I really think there's going to be, some sort of an overlay where we're really able to leverage all of these different, essentially battery packs all over the place. And then on top of that, I think, as we touched on earlier, more and more vehicle options and innovation in vehicles. And in some cases, people may have to think about reframing how they use their vehicles. And hopefully it's always for the positive, right? At the end of the day, fleet operators need to be able to run their businesses and continue moving forward in a profitable way. So the technology needs to be there to support that ultimately to help with that transition.
Lastly, we always end our interviews with some rapid fire questions. Jim, are you ready?
Sure, let's go for it.
Okay. What are you reading right now?
Spare by Prince Harry.
Jim, what would you name your boat if you had one?
The Tin Can.
Now, who is someone that you admire?
I'm going to give a shout out here to my wife. She's an incredible spouse. She's a mother. She's a business owner, and she does it all, and she does it very well.
That's cool. What is the closest thing to real magic that you've witnessed?
Oh, I think there's real magic that happens out there every day, but I'm going to fall right into the birth of my son. I think will always be the top of my list. Seeing that happen, that's magic.
What has been the biggest challenge to you personally since the pandemic began?
So on a personal level, I think it's probably something a lot of people can relate to that have young kids. I think it was a tough couple of years, and keeping my son on track with sort of the progression of education. Missing a couple of really crucial years in there was difficult, but happy to say we've got some awesome teachers in the school system here, and he's getting back on track, and I think that though was a big challenge.
Okay. Now, we've all been watching a lot of Netflix and TV lately. What's your favorite movie or show?
Oh, anything Star Wars. Anything Star Wars at all. I watched the whole series, the Mandalorian, all of it. I love it all.
Lastly, Jim, what's exciting you about your industry right now?
This is where I would geek out a little bit and say what's not exciting right now. We're going through some major transitions I'd say with the technology that we have and on all the change happening, there's collaboration like never before, really. Seeing new technology come out constantly. It's an exciting time, I'd say, to be an engineer and to work with a team of engineers. And I have to say, I have the pleasure of working with the greatest group of engineers there is. Everyone from building, mechanical, lighting, electrical engineers, all with a drive and passion for their work like no other group I've seen. I think it's just an exciting time.
Jim, this is it. We've reached the end of another episode of the Think Energy podcast. Thank you for joining me today. If our listeners want to learn more about you or the organization, how can they connect?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'd say check out our website at envari.com, and we'll just reach out through there, and we're happy to reach out and have conversations. Always happy to discuss this topic and many more.
Again, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had a lot of fun. Cheers.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Think Energy podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening. And to find out more about today's guest or previous episodes, visit thinkenergypodcast.com. I hope you'll join us again next time as we spark even more conversations about the energy of tomorrow.